Today's tutorial might be my favorite yet. I am so excited. We are going to be making boxer shorts. And I'm going to show you two different versions. So we have just like regular boxer shorts, and then we also have ruffle boxer shorts. The construction is super simple and the ruffles is like just a little added bonus. So I'm going to show you both and you can pick which one you want to do or do both of them. There's also no self-drafting today, which is nice. We're going to use my pants pattern called the lane pants, which the pattern as it is like a long, wide leg, elastic, comfy, cozy, everyday pant. And I'm going to show you how to very easily hack it into shorts, which is basically just cutting the legs off, but we're doing a little extra zhuzh to it. Also, the pattern as it is comes with an optional cargo pocket, which we obviously won't use because the cargo pocket is like past the shorts. And it has a drawstring, which I'm not going to do today, but if you wanted to add a drawstring, the instructions are in the pattern. You could easily add that. And the pattern also goes over some top stitching on the rise and the inseam, and we're going to skip over that as well. So it really is like a bare bones, super duper easy, quick project. And I also wanted to say, I feel like I get the question a lot of, can I alter my patterns? Like if I like this dress pattern I have, but I want it to be shorter, or I want the bodice to hit here or whatnot. Absolutely, you can change your patterns. In fact, I feel like this will be a very good primer for if you've never altered a pattern before. I'll kind of hold your hand through the process of how you might tweak and change things to fit your body and preferences better. I also think that that's a really good way to just go about your sewing and pattern experience, having an open mind of tweaking things yourself and changing things. And that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything like wrong with the pattern. You're just tailoring your wardrobe to be better for you, which is an amazing skill to have. Okay, what we're going to start off doing is I'm going to trace the front and back pant pieces, and then we are going to make alterations to that traced pattern so that you don't have to cut up or change or draw on your existing lane pants pattern pieces. So let's jump into that. Of paper or my kids' old construction paper. I'll just like tape together panels of it to make a big-ish sheet. And these pattern pieces aren't even that huge, so you wouldn't really need that much paper. But that is what I'll be tracing on today. So all you're going to do is place your pattern piece on the paper and trace around it. If you have pattern weights or something, that is extra handy, but they're not super necessary. Also, make sure you're marking any little notches. So I've marked, there's a notch there. There are also two lines here that are technically for the cargo pocket, but we are going to use them as a reference, so mark those. And then I'm also going to mark a line on the other side of the pant leg where that cargo pocket line would be, and just make sure it's perpendicular to this grain line going through the pattern. Okay, so now that I have that, I can remove the pattern piece. I'm going to transfer those notch lines to the inside. And now we have the general shape, and what we need to do is basically guess how long we want our pant leg of our shorts. So because I did a practice round, I know where I'm going to do my line. You can either copy what I do if you like kind of where it hits on my body, or you can make yours longer or shorter or whatever. This is kind of the whole thing about altering patterns, is a lot of it is just like guesswork / a hypothesis, and then you make a sample, see how it fits, tweak from there. Sometimes you make a couple before you find like the perfect spot, which is how I found my perfect spot. So with that being said, the spot that I am going to cut my shorts off at is 1 inch down from this bottom cargo pocket line. There's two lines. One is for like the flap of the cargo pocket and one is for the top edge of the actual pocket. So the bottom one, we are going to measure 1 inch down from that and end our shorts there. And this is why we marked the line on the other side, so we would get a nice straight line. And extend that line past this edge here. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, perfect. So that is the line we're gonna go with to end the shorts. And one thing I think it's important to note before going on is I've determined that my hem of my shorts is going to be first folded under 1/2 inch and then folded under 1.5 inches. You can do a smaller hem if you want to, you could do a bigger hem if you want to. You'll just have to kind of take that into account as you're tracing and drafting all this. So basically I need to account 2 inches for my hem. Now, if you are not doing the hem and you are doing a ruffle short instead, that means you would have to take your hemline here and cut it shorter for the ruffle version. So I'll cut here if I'm doing a hemmed short, but then if you are going to do a ruffle, you need to cut it shorter than that. And because my hem is 2 inches total, right? 1/2 inch and then 1.5 inches, it needs to be at least 2 inches shorter. So I'm going to take it up 2 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just measuring that line and again, taking it straight across. I'm gonna mark that ruffle. I'm just using the same pattern piece for both versions. You could, if you want to, cut 2 separate ones. I think it will suffice for me to just fold the hem under when I cut for the ruffle. Okay, so now what we need to do, you can see here, this inseam is kind of at a diagonal angle, and when the pants are made in their full length version, that is good and great because the seams like line up with each other and they taper down into the pant leg. But because we are doing shorts and we are going to fold this hem up, we need to get the inseam at more of a right angle. Otherwise, when you fold it under, it's gonna get super wonky. So what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna measure a right angle off of this straight line and then ease it back into that diagonal. And I'm not doing this in an exact science way. You absolutely could if you want to, but honestly, this is very much my vibe when I sew for myself. So I'm just staying true to that and showing you my process. All right, I feel like that looks good. I'll erase some of these lines in here so that it's not as confusing. Okay, so now we have the front pant leg. I think that is done. Oh, also another thing I was going to mention, I should have said this earlier. I am cutting a size 10. That is the size that I am in the lane pants pattern. You can find your size in the size chart to figure out where you fall. But I will mention, if you want like the really oversized, like baggy boyfriend boxer vibe, I would maybe even size up like 1 or 2 sizes and then cut the elastic down to your waist size. So you'll have extra ease around your hips and your butt and whatnot, but your waist will still be the right size. And that's the glorious thing about elastic waistband pants, is that you can have as much ease as you want all the other places, and then you can kind of cinch your waist in to make them fit you well. And honestly, I would probably size up myself a couple sizes. I think I would like a slightly more oversized look, but I wanted to make my normal size so that you could see what that looks like on me, so that you can decide if you want the same type of look or something a bit more oversized. All this to say, I'm just going to label this pattern piece with what piece it is and the size. And now I'm just gonna cut it out with my rotary cutter. I just gave it a little fold so it doesn't roll up as much. And then I'm also going to pre-fold that ruffle line. So when you cut your pattern pieces for like the regular hemmed version, you'll have it full length. And when you're cutting for the ruffle, you'll just fold that under to cut your fabric. We're basically going to do the same thing with the back pant leg. So same thing, I'm just going to start off by tracing it. right, the back pant leg is done. So I went kind of quicker that time. I traced it. I marked all of the notches that I needed to mark. I made my hemline 1 inch below this cargo pocket line, and then I made the ruffle line 2 3/4 inches above the hemline. Oh, and I right angled that inseam. Now we have the front pant leg and back pant leg pieces. And the only other pattern pieces we're using from the pattern is the waistband, which we make no alterations to. You just cut that to the same size as you've cut the rest of your pattern. And then the pocket bag. This one we will need to alter slightly, but I'm not going to cut a new piece of it because we're just folding the bottom up. And I'll show you why we need to do that. All right, so if we're looking at the front pant piece, you'll see that if you lay the pocket bag over top of it, it's going to be a bit longer than we want it to be. So the pocket bag ends here. It will be folded up a bit because we will do a French seam on this pocket, but it's gonna end pretty close to here. Now, if you're hemming your pants, that hem will be pretty dang close to the end of your pocket bag. And if you're doing the ruffle, it's going to run into it. So all we're going to do is fold the bottom of that pocket bag up. I've folded mine up 1.5 inches. Again, I've done some samples. The first time I only folded it up 1 inch and it wasn't quite enough. It was like super duper close. I thought I gave myself enough room and I didn't quite. Also, this pocket bag is, as it is, very deep. So folding it up 1.5 inches is going to make it still a plentiful pocket bag, just not super duper deep. So to save yourself headache, I would fold that up unless you're planning to make like longer shorts or like Bermuda type shorts. Then you could probably get away with the regular pocket bag. So those are the 4 pattern pieces you need to cut. And this is all in the pattern instructions, but just to reiterate, you need to cut 2 pieces of the front pant mirrored, 2 pieces of the back pant mirrored, and then you need 2 mirrored pocket bags with this fold here and 1 waistband cut on the fold. Also, my pattern pieces for the lane pants might look different than yours just because this is like the first draft that I printed before I like tweaked a couple of like the fonts and notches and things like that. But I promise all the shapes are the same. Okay, one last thing you need to know. If you are doing the ruffle pants, you also need to cut a ruffle to put on your shorts. So how we cut the ruffle, we basically need like a long skinny strip of fabric and you need to decide how long you want your ruffle and how ruffly you want it. So I have decided to make my ruffle 1.5 inches long, which is actually a pretty small-ish ruffle. You can make it a bit smaller, but I feel like it might get a little bit tricky to gather. So just consider that. But if I want my actual ruffle to be 1.5 inches long, I know I want to hem it with a really small hem. So I'm going to turn it up 1/4 inch 2 times, which adds 1/2 inch. So now we're at 2 inches. And then I know 1/2 inch is also going to get eaten up by the gathers. So if in total I want that 1.5 inch ruffle with 1/2 inch to add to the hem and 1/2 inch to add to the gathers, I need to cut it 2.5 inches long. So we have the ruffle length, and then to get the ruffle width, I'm first going to add together the 2 widths of these short pant legs. So this one is 15 inches, and this one is 17.5. So in total, the circumference of that pant leg is 32.5 inches. Some of that gets lost in seam allowance, but it all kind of comes out in the wash because of the gathers. So if we're going on a circumference of 32.5 inches, typically my standard multiplier for gathering is 1.5 times the width. I think 1.5 produces like a nice flowy gather. For this instance, I don't want it to be quite as full of a gather, so I'm going to multiply it by 1.3 instead of 1.5. So 32.5 times 1.3 comes out to 42.25. And so I'm just gonna round that down a little bit to 42. So if you followed all my math there, I need 2 long ruffle strips that are 2.5 inches by 42 inches. And again, all of this like tweaking and redrafting is very much trial and error, very much a hypothesis. If you're making these shorts for the first time, I would definitely consider your first ones you make to be kind of like your practice shorts, and then you can kind of edit from there. But those are the measurements that I'm going with after I have done my practice shorts. Okay, you now have all the tools you need to cut out your fabric. So I'll meet you back here after I've cut everything out, and we'll jump into the construction, which is basically the same as the Lane pants instructions. So we're pretty much just going to follow that, and then we'll be changing a few things around the hem, mainly with the ruffle shorts. And since the ruffles are added at the very end, I'm basically just going to have a little choose your own adventure diverging paths where I'll show you how to do either hem. So go cut your fabric and I will meet you back here for construction. We're starting off here with the pocket bag, and like I mentioned, the construction for these shorts is exactly the same as the Lane pants until you get to the hem. We're also just skipping over the cargo pockets, the drawstring, and any top stitching along the inseam and the rise. So this is very much going to be a broad overview of the construction of the shorts for all of the main steps, and if you need more specific guidance, the instructions that come with the pattern are very detailed, so those will get you through. And then if you need more visual guidance, I do have another tutorial for the Lane pants that shows in detail absolutely every step. So here we've finished the front seam of the pocket bag, and now we are going to sew along this slanted line here at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then to do the understitch, you'll flip that pocket bag kind of splayed open and tuck the seam allowance toward the pocket bag, and then do a stitch right along the edge of that seam there to understitch, as we call it, the seam allowance toward the pocket bag. Give everything a nice press, pin that pocket in place, and then I also do a basting stitch along the side seam and the waist line there to keep the pocket in place. I don't show that, but a basting stitch is a good idea to keep everything where it needs to be. Alright, now we are going to lay our back pant leg on top of our front pant leg and pin it along the side seam there, and then sew that together also with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and this time you want to make sure you finish your raw edges. I have a serger, so that's how I'm finishing my raw edges, but if you do not have one, I have a video that shows how to finish your edges with your regular sewing machine. Once you've attached the front and back together, you will lay it out flat. It's starting to come together, so now you can see the pocket, and then you're going to lay the other pant leg you've made on top, right sides together, and pin along the front rise and the back rise. You'll sew along those lines again with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish those seams as well. Here you can see that finished seam, and you're going to want to give it a press. So this can be a little bit tricky with that curve, but I kind of do it in 2 parts. I do the flat part first and then kind of the little baby inseam we've got going on with the shorts here. And this is where we'll skip over the top stitching of the rise. That's in the instructions, but it is optional. You don't have to do it. And then we are going to pin together this inseam here, pin that in place, and then stitch along that line with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and finish your raw edges. Look at that, your shorts are really starting to come together. So we're going to jump to the waistband next, and then we'll do the hem very last. And before I attach the 2 ends of my waistband, I'm first going to pre-iron that fold in place. So I'm folding the waistband in half, and then I am unfolding it at the very ends to straight stitch a line with a 1/2 inch seam allowance there at the end of the waistband to attach it into one big circle. I'm pressing that seam allowance open flat and then just refolding and pressing that in place. So I have one big waistband in a circle folded in half. I forgot to cut the notch in my waistband when I cut my fabric, so I'm just finding the center here and cutting a little notch in my waistband because I am going to need it. I'm lining up the center back of my pants to the seam in my waistband, and then the notch in my waistband lines up with the center front. And then I'm also lining the sides of the pants to the sides of the waistband and pinning everything in place. Once that's all good to go, I'm going to be attaching my waistband to my pant legs with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way along this waistband here, but I do need to leave about a 1.5 inch gap in the waistband to insert the elastic. So you can see that here, I have a little bit of a hole in my waistband. To insert your elastic, you're going to attach a safety pin to the end of it and then feed that safety pin attached to the elastic through
your little channel you've created here, and then guide. You can feel that safety pin in the channel. So keep like grabbing that pin, pulling, grabbing, pulling until it goes all the way around and out the other side. Once you have 2 tails hanging out, then you will unattach your safety pin and pin together those 2 tails of elastic, overlapping about 1/2 inch. We're going to zigzag stitch these 2 elastics together, and my machine always has trouble with this step, so don't worry about making it pretty. If you have to use your hand wheel or press your foot up and down, do what you got to do to make it work as long as it's secure. Then you can suck your elastic back into that channel and seal up that gap that you've left with, again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you'll need to finish that raw edge, and this raw edge can be a little bit tricky just because of the elastic. It kind of bunches up the fabric. So you can see here as I'm finishing my edge with my serger, I'm kind of readjusting the fabric so that the section that I'm sewing at the time is as flat as it can be, and then I'm bunching the fabric away from where my presser foot and my needles are. We're also going to top stitch along the elastic, and that's an optional thing, you don't have to do it, but I think especially if you're going for like the boxer look, you'll probably want to do it. And one thing to note about top stitching, I've noticed that for me personally, after I top stitch my elastic, it tends to be slightly looser than it was before I top stitched, but after like the first wash, it kind of snaps back to its size. So if your elastic comes out a little bit wider than it was when you first tried it on, that could be why. Okay, the last thing we need to do is hem the shorts. So if you're doing the regular shorts, not the ruffle shorts, we're first going to press the hem in place. So for me, I'm first folding it up 1/2 inch and then folding it up 1.5 inches. You may have done different measurements, so do whatever you want to do here. But before you sew it, this is a good place to try them on. And if you're doing the ruffle shorts or the regular shorts, this is where you try them on. So regular shorts, first press up your hem here, then try them on, see if they are where you like them. If you need to make any adjustments, this is the time to do it. And then for the ruffle shorts, this is a good time to try them on and kind of just know that they'll be however longer your ruffle is going to be. So I've tried mine on, they're looking good, so I am edge stitching my hem in place, and this is what the regular boxer shorts look like. And again, this is a size 10 for me. That's my regular size in this pattern. I feel like they look good, they fit great. I would be interested in trying maybe a size or 2 up just to see how the oversized fit looks, but I do love them as is. Now, if you are making the ruffle shorts, it is time to add your ruffles. So essentially what we need to do is take these long strips of fabric that we made, sew them into circles, hem them, and then gather and attach them to the shorts. So let's walk through that whole process. Like we did with the waistband, I'm going to pre-fold and iron my hem here. So first I'm folding it up 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to fold it up again another 1/4 inch. You can do your hem of your ruffle however you want to, but I feel like a nice small hem looks good for the ruffle. And then I'm going to sew a straight stitch to attach the 2 ends together at 1/2 inch seam allowance and unfolding that pre-folded hem that I did there. Then I'm going to finish off that raw edge and then refold what I had unfolded and stitch that little baby hem in place. Also, I should explain why I decided to pre-hem it before I attached the ruffle. It's just because it's such a small amount of space. I figured once it was attached to the shorts and all gathered, it would be tricky to iron. So that's why I did it in this order. All right, now we are going to do the basting stitch. So don't forget to lengthen your stitch length. And I'm only going to do 1 row of basting stitches. So I'm starting off at a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then moving to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance after the first like couple inches, and I'll show you why I do that. When I go around this loop back to circle it again, I'm going to kind of overlap the basting stitches, but my second, like when I come in the second time, it's going to go underneath the first stitch. So you can kind of see here, they don't actually touch, but they do overlap a smidge, and this just helps the gathers be very even and kind of stay in place at your starting and stopping points. Before I attach the ruffle to the pant leg, I'm first going to find the 4 like quadrants of the pant leg to make it easier as I'm pinning and gathering. So I'm folding it basically in 4 and snipping little notches to mark those places. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the ruffle. I'm going to first fold it in half and then half again to find the 4 points of the ruffle and of the pant leg so that I can match them up when I pin. I'm going to start by pinning the seam of the ruffle to the inseam of the shorts, and I also think it's important to note that the side seam of the shorts is actually not directly across, right? If you fold it in half from the inseam, the side seam is not directly across from the inseam because the front leg is shorter or less wide, I guess, and the pant leg is wider. So there's going to be a notch a little bit off from the side seam. Once those 4 quadrants are lined up and pinned, you're then going to start gathering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my basting stitch and gather along 2 of the quadrants. So I'm going halfway around the pant leg. So I'm pulling my basting stitch, getting those gathers in place, and then I'm going back through and adjusting everything so the gathers are really nice and even. And once they are, I can pin those in place. Also, I should mention the reason I only did 1 row of basting stitches. Kind of 2 reasons. One, there's so much going on in such a small amount of space. I feel like I didn't really need that extra row. Also, there's not a lot of gathers, right? We only multiplied it by 1.3 instead of my normal 1.5. So I just felt like I didn't really need it. Also, I'll let you in on a little secret. When I'm sewing for myself personally, I only ever do 1 row of basting stitches because I just feel like it's way easier and I have so much practice gathering that it's pretty easy peasy for me. Okay, so once I've done the first half of gathers, I'm now going the opposite direction. You can see I'm pulling the basting stitch from the other direction and doing the other half of the gathers around the pant leg. And here we have all of the gathering finished. To attach your ruffle to your pant leg, we're going in with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So the basting stitch that we did was at 3/8 of an inch, so it's really pretty close. They're about 1/8 of an inch apart, so you're just going to be stitching right alongside that basting stitch. Just make sure you don't overlap it, otherwise it'll be poking out the visible side when you're done. Also, as you're going along here, use your left hand to kind of readjust and tweak those gathers as you're going. If you just kind of blindly go straight through it, you're going to get kind of bunched up gathers. So yeah, just be mindful of that. Keep your gathers even as you're sewing them. And then this is what that looks like when it's all finished. You can see those stitches are real close together. Now all you need to do is finish off that raw edge, which I'm doing with my serger. I also should mention, you can see here it's like cutting off a little bit. If you don't have a serger and you're doing it with your regular machine, I feel like it would be a good idea to trim a little bit of that seam allowance and then finish the raw edge. I also press my gathers flat, otherwise they're kind of going to be like flouncing up as you're walking around. So just giving my gathers a little bit of a press, making them look really nice, and then make sure you're repeating that on the other leg of your shorts, and then they will be all done. I made 4 pairs of shorts total in like the planning and filming of this tutorial, and I'll absolutely be making more of them. I want to try the oversized vibe that I had told you about, but yeah, I just am going to be wearing these all summer. I love them so much.